Então, nós teremos agora a palestra do professor Balaganapathi Devarakonda, da Universidade de Nova Delhi, já vou apresentá-lo em mais detalhe. E o nome da conferência é Lugar de autossuficiência na conceituação da personalidade, explorando o discurso dos direitos humanos. Professor Devarakonda é professor de filosofia da Universidade de Deli. É um dos principais centros de filosofia da Índia e atua também nas universidades. Aliás, ele presentemente está num cargo de nomeação do governo indiano, uma cadeira de estudos de cultura indiana na Jamaica. Mas a base, ele vai retornar daqui a alguns meses, é a Universidade de Deli. Seus interesses em investigação estão centrados nas áreas da filosofia indiana, filosofia da religião, filosofia social, política e prática filosófica. No contexto da filosofia indiana, trabalha com o budismo primitivo. Estou traduzindo aqui do inglês early, eu também não gosto muito dessa expressão em português, e da historiografia da filosofia indiana, dentro da especificidade da filosofia indiana. Além de ensino e pesquisa, o professor Devarakonda é conselheiro filosófico certificado pela American Philosophy Practitioners Association, em Nova York. Ele também é membro do Conselho do Corpo Docente International da American Philosophical Practitioners Association em Nova York e é um dos diretores fundadores da Associação de Praticantes Filosóficos da Índia, uma organização sem fins lucrativos criada para a promoção da prática filosófica da Índia. É um prazer também, porque estamos nesse encontro aqui realizando algo que a gente já pensou em algum tempo, de trazer aqui um colega da Índia para participar desses debates, um conterrâneo. Professor Devarakonda, it's a pleasure to introduce you. Okay. First of all, for you to accept our invitation.
Thank you.
We took some time to confirm all these procedures, but in the end, we were successful in having you here. And I'm sure your contribution here, we have been having the contribution in the context of Buddhist studies of people from so many places.
Right.
I think I also represent to a certain extent India, but I'm also a Brazilian, so it's Indo-Brazilian. But so happy that you are here today, and I think it will be the beginning of continued interaction with you and the University of Delhi, by the way.
Yes.
No? That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The chair of the session, Professor Deli, and other distinguished colleagues who have joined us this evening. I don't know whether I should call it afternoon or evening. You're not sleeping, right? We just had tea. I should be closer. Okay. Yeah, I hope you're not sleeping, right? So can I ask you to lift your right hand? Right hand, no? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Take a deep breath. Okay. Yeah, fun apart. Namaste. At the outset, I believe I should thank two people because of whom I am here today. One is Professor Deli, with whom I had email correspondence for some time, and then it started building the relation, and now I am here because of him. So thank you so much, Professor Deli, for doing all the groundwork for me to come here. And I am greatly indebted to Professor Antonio Florentino for this kind invitation. Thank you so much, Professor, for inviting me, because I know that it was a bit complicated. You had to go to Indian Embassy and inquire about the details, and then, yeah, but finally I could come here. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. And this is my first visit to Brazil, and I'm really enjoying my visit here because my interactions with the people and moving around is really wonderful. In addition to that, actually, the actual purpose for which I'm here is the conference. And I'm really, I felt so happy to look at the quality of the conversations and discussions that are happening in the conference hall. It's really wonderful. I'm going back with a lot of knowledge, a lot of insights, which I should ponder upon later on in my future. So, but before I begin my own presentation, something that really makes this context for this conference on human rights is important for all of us to know. I believe Professor Florentino has already mentioned about the context, but I thought I should bring that back into our immediate consciousness in the sense that there are two wars happening around, and we are talking about human rights. They don't care about human rights. I'm not taking any sides of the countries, but they don't just care about human rights, right? The world now doesn't really care about human rights, and we are talking about human rights. So the context is very bitter, and context is really hurting. It's not that war is happening in Ukraine or in Gaza Strip. It is also happening among within us, no, as an individual human being, which is really disturbing. So I believe in this particular context, thinking about this conference and organizing it, of course, he might have conceptualized it some time back, but look at the context that evolved around it is very important. So that's what I felt, when I looked at the invitation and started looking at it. I was really disturbed by to write a paper on human rights when the context is war. And in fact, I don't know. I think it's Julia who has mentioned, I think it is her who has mentioned, no war time is the human right. Is it something of that sort? Yeah. When I read that, I was like, oh, she's actually nailing it. No, telling us that, yeah, this is the point that we have to really look at, focus it. So it was wonderful. Yeah. Having said that, let me proceed to my presentation. It is on personhood and self-reliance. Okay. So we also had a presentation in the previous plenary on personhood from Buddhist perspective by one of our colleagues, right? And Buddhism has been debated and discussed. I'm so happy to see the representation of Indian tradition here in terms of Professor Dilip speaking on Hinduism, and then there are many presentations on Buddhism. I'm so happy about this representation that has come up in the conference. So I'm trying to look at these two concepts, how personhood has evolved or presented, developed, and constructed by the West, and then an alternative kind of reality that is constructed in India in terms of self-reliance. Okay, so these are the two things that I'm trying to interrogate and try to come up with whatever inferences that are possible. So this is my focus in this presentation. You know, yeah, this is how I'm going to build it. Okay. I'm going to present something like dominant perspective and criticism of it and Indian perspective. This is, I mean, Hindu perspective. I don't mean Indian perspective by Indian anymore. So this is the prelude which has really disturbed me, which I thought I should share with you. When I thought of writing a paper, this is the first thing that came to my mind, which I wrote. Okay. I'm just reading it for the sake of all of us. The background of the origin and development of the most of the concepts are innocence and ignorance, along with the stimulative inquisitiveness to transcend present self, space, and time of the epistemic beings. We are all epistemic beings. When do we go for concept? When do you go for developing a concept? It could be our ignorance or it could be our innocence. And it can also be a kind of stimulative inquisitiveness to transcend the present self, present time, and present space. Okay, that's what stimulates us. No, this is what is philosophical for me. This is what stimulates us to go for new concepts, construct new concepts, conceptualize new concepts, right? And this inquisitiveness is sometimes rooted in quest to know, as we often give the definition of philosophy to be quest for knowledge. And sometimes this inquisitiveness is also in controlling and colonizing the other. Okay? So why is this quest there in you? Sometimes to know something, and at times it is also to control the other. The quest for transcendence stimulates and facilitates the movement from ignorance to knowledge and non-knowledge. Often humans are blissfully innocent and pretend to be innocent of this process and its limitations. Because this transcendence also has a limitations which we often try to ignore them, pretend to be innocent of, and try to move forward. This innocence, which could be ignorant innocence or innocent ignorance, both are troubling concepts for me, encourages people to universalize their limited conception. That's this ignorance is the one which helps you to universalize it for everyone. The concept that you develop out of a context, from which you want to evolve, transcend, you tend to universalize it for everyone, right? That's what happens in most of the cases. The quest for transcendence is also quest for immanence. When you want to actually transcend a particular situation, you also want to be immanent within it. It is as much objective as subjective. Whenever a new concept evolves, we tend to make it an objective one, but actually in the process of making it an objective one, you're also making it purely subjective. As much you make an attempt to make it objective, you would be actually rooting it within yourself and making it more subjective than making it objective. This is how the process is as much outward as inward, right? Knowing this facilitates the limitations of one's conceptualization and develops as much needed epistemic humility that we talk about. I'm rooting the whole thing, whole paradigm within the epistemic humility that one should have in the process of universalizing the concept that one has evolved in an attempt to transcend their own self, space, and time. I hope I made this clear, right? It's thickly written one, but I thought this is the background within which I'm placing human rights discourse. Okay, so this is the background, philosophical background that I constructed, within which I'm trying to place this whole discourse of human rights, and then proceed further. Before I proceed further to my argument, I'm immensely benefited by the previous speakers, especially. I have noted, I could understand because of the translation process and my own limitations of understanding the translation. I could only gather some of the thoughts. I'm sorry, but I found every paper to be equally interesting and important. But some of the things which have really disturbed and which are relevant to my paper's context, I would be talking about them. For instance, the first presentation by Robin, it's not, the question is how to question what you know. It's not to question what you do not know. It is to question what you already know. See, you already know something called human rights. Do you question it? No, you think that you go by confirmation bias and you say that, oh, I know it, right? So that's the confirmation bias that most of us will have, which tells you that you already know it, you don't have to question it. But actually, unless you question the knowledge that you already have, you can never go forward. And it puts you in a kind of a dark room where you would blissfully be thinking that you know everything, but you don't know anything, right? So this is the very first thing that came on the first day's session, which is very important. How to question what you know, and how to reject what you consider to be good. How to reject what you consider to be good. How to reject what you consider to be human rights within quote, right? We have all have the knowledge of that, but how do you question it, and how do you reject that notion that is told that is immersed in your mind saying that this is the good one, this is the best kind of human rights discourse or conceptualization that has come up, so you should accept it. And we have already accepted as the post-colonial countries, blissfully, ignorantly. That's why I stress these two concepts, innocence and ignorance. Are we innocent? Are we ignorant? This, as intellectually, we have to ask these two questions, like, am I ignorant? Am I innocent? Am I pretending to be ignorant and innocent? Right? It is our problem. It is not their problem. Whoever has developed the concept, it is not their problem. It is our problem. So if we don't realize it, we are the ones who are going to have a problem with it, problem with our own lives. So that is very important thing that I found coming up from Robin, which says, which creates a context for my paper. In fact, when I heard that, it's same thing that I'm going to talk about. And the kind of distinction that she brought also between need and right. In fact, when I posed this question to you, Robin, what I meant was, probably most of the indigenous cultures have rooted it within the concept of need, because they don't have to think of the concept of right in the sense that it has evolved, right? So that is how it is our duty also to look at our own traditions and try to understand them. That's how, when I was keenly listening to Professor Dilip, but unfortunately in the translation I lost some of the things that he was mentioning. He talked about debt, right? Runa, debt. So I thought, yeah, this is another interesting way of looking at the rights discourse from an indigenous tradition, which says probably how I am indebted to my own knowledge, my own ancestors, my own nature and cosmos around me is important in order to understand my rights, right? Unless I know the framework, the limitations of the door and then the seats, how can I talk about my right here, right? So that is how I should know my framework. Only then I will know what are my rights. So when he was talking about Rana, I was thinking that, this is one of the instruments where it says that, yeah, these are the limitations that you have within which you exist, and then you talk about rights. Be aware of these things and then talk about your rights. So that's another very important concept that I thought I should refer to. And also Almares. I really enjoyed his presentation where he spoke about our rights of the indigenous people included in universal human rights. Are the rights of the indigenous people included in universal human rights that we talk about, right? And he mentioned one concept which really disturbed me, which is like delayed people. How do you consider somebody to be delayed people? Okay, they are delayed in the course of history. This concept itself is highly prejudiced and presented, right? And we had a presentation on Benewa. Am I pronouncing it right? I don't know. Yeah, Benewa, where right is not right is a condition, not a privilege. That's what he was mentioning. Right is not a privilege. It is a condition, and it has to be earned. It's not that you automatically get it in the cultural indigenous traditions. So these are all alternative models of, actually, there was a big mine that has come up here, right? In the name of intellectual discourse, we discovered a mine, gold mine here, intellectual mine, which is to be further investigated so that we can come up with diamonds and whatnot, different kind of ornaments. So, and also Mishika's presentation, yesterday, last evening, where she was arguing that knowing is important for you to recognize its existence, which is again coming back to George's presentation, where epistemologies are important. Unless you are clear about your own epistemologies, you can never recognize the existence of the reality, even if it is there in front of you. So knowing is a precondition for recognizing its existence. Otherwise, even if it exists, you don't care about it, you don't recognize it, which is such a problematic thing, which many of the colonies have resorted to. They never recognize the right of the people, the colonized people, because for them, They just don't care about these people, right? So that these are some of the important aspects that I thought I should revisit so that it creates a background for my presentation. Largely broadly, this is the kind of argument that I'm trying to develop in terms of the theoretical perspectives of the dominant view evolved out of a worldview that is of the form of empty, abstract, universal, and doesn't provide space for other worldviews. So this is what I'm going to criticize, and I'm going to present self-reliance, which is in Sanskrit, Indian tradition, it is called Sanskritic tradition. It is called Atmanirbharata, which even now the Indian government is trying to promote. That stems from different worldview is proposed to show the limitations of the dominant view. This is what I'm going to do in the process. I may succeed or fail, that you can decide. There are certain caveats that I thought I should mention before I proceed further. One of the things is I don't want to use, though the conference says non-Western epistemologies, I thought I should not use this non-West or West or non-West, because I have some limitations in accepting this binary. So I thought I prefer to use a dominant view. Why do I say it is a dominant view? Because it is dominant in our minds. In the non-West, it is not dominant in the West. It is dominant in the minds of the non-West. So a non-West is the one which is now has this hangover, continuing with this hangover of the West, right? So that is how I felt use of the word dominant perspective would be, dominant view would be a better one for me for this particular paper. The negative, and also when we say non-West, we are presenting non-West, I mean our own selves, in a negative way. The absence of the other or negation of the other. No, when you say non-West, you're basically absence of the other or negation of the other. So that's how I felt a bit uneasy in using non-West. And it is also for another reason. West is not a geographical location, rather an epistemological category. This category is dominant in the minds of the people of the East, unless this is either discarded or deconstructed by proposing alternative methods, theoretical perspectives, and rationality. It's going to continue to influence the people of the East strongly. So my concern is to address West in the minds of the East. That is how I would call them to be only a dominant perspective, rather than calling them to be like noun with the noun West. Okay, so that's one of the important caveats that I thought I should make. The other one is, look at the way non-West is defined. You can open Google, or you can open any of the what are these encyclopedias, and look for non-West. Okay, what is it that you find as the defining category of non-West? They would say non-West is defined as those states or cultures that did not share or experience the ideas, values, and transformations of the West. Okay, so if we accept such kind of a definition of ourselves, then it's like we are putting ourselves in trouble, because the epistemology is already structured. Epistemology is created. West and non-West epistemology is created. So if you enter into it and try to use it, then we have a wonderful scholar in India by name Partha Chatterjee, who talks about derivative discourse, which means the discourse parameters are already decided by the colonizers, and you tend to, any attempt on your part to deviate or reject it is participation of you in the derivative discourse. So you become a part of their own framework that they have fixed. Okay, so instead of that, we should try to come out of it, right? That is, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So that is also one of the important aspects of why I think we should come out of this epistemological structure. Yeah, again, this is another important aspect that I want to stress, and I want you to reflect on it. Like West and non-West, when we use them, are they self-referential? Is it that West uses again for them, or how is it? No, it is a complicated one, right? So are they self-referential or other referential categories is a very important question that we have to think about, right? There are a few more. My concern is not human rights as such, but the dominant perspective. That's what I would be dealing with in this presentation. Okay, and I'm not looking at the complete history of human rights and its activism because that's not possible within the limitations of the time. My interest is only in the philosophy of human rights and history of ideas, but I would be referring to certain historical aspects as well. I'm not really getting deep into the theoretical perspectives as well due to the limitations of time. There are 6 different critiques of human rights that we find in terms of realist, utilitarian, Marxist, particularist, feminist, and post-colonial. My response doesn't fall specifically in any of them, but it may take all of them into consideration holistically or singularly. Now, what is this dominant view that I'm referring to? No, which for me is a troubling kind of one, right? In fact, when I conceptualized it as per the Indian methodology that we have in terms of poropaksha. We call it poropaksha, which means the opponent's view. You present opponent's view first, and then khandana, you criticize it, and then propose your own siddhanta. So I thought of developing it on that model, but I couldn't do it completely. But I have cursory glance of all those aspects in the paper that I'm going to present now. So my Purupaksha, which is like a dominant view that I'm talking about, is simple and which is very well known to all of us, right? This is simple. What are human rights? We all know that human rights are inalienable, innate rights of the human beings. This is how we are told, right? And also we are told that human rights means they're also universal, plural, and legal. Okay, these are the 3 attributes that are provided further. Human rights are defined as inalienable and innate rights of the humans, which are also considered to be universal, plural, and legal. Okay, so this is simply all of us agree with this. Now the question begins with human, the very concept of human. Who is human? Who are humans? It looks to be very naive, stupid question. But if you look at the history of ideas, you would be surprised to see how who is human has evolved over a period of time. Okay? For instance, they said human. See, simply what you can say is humans are the ones who are born to humans, right? Simple way of saying it is humans are the ones who are born to humans. So simple way. This is a species-centric approach of understanding ourselves. But they said, no, actually humans, we have to define it in a particular way. So I'm coming to this point of definitions, how dangerous these definitions are. And then they said human rights are specific to those who have personhood. Personhood is at the center. Personhood is the yardstick on the basis of which human rights were attributed. Here, what you see is there is a shift from species-centric approach to individual-centric approach that has come up. Okay. Now, again, the question comes like, who is a person? That's again a big question, right? So, how do we? What constitutes personhood is a question, and this is again troubling one. Have a look at it closely, and you would find you would be surprised. People said being self-aware, being self-conscious, and possessing reason and autonomy, freedom, and dignity. Okay, it's not that initially they said all these qualities are to be there. Initially, it is like possessing reason. Only those who have reason are persons. And then only those people who have self-awareness, which means knowing how different yourself from the others is self-awareness. And self-consciousness is knowing oneself. Okay? So only such kind of people were considered to be persons. Now, do you understand the politics of it in terms of like, there are many people who will not be falling into the definition of this. Once you say self-consciousness and self-awareness is the defining feature of a person, then children will not be a part of it. And slaves were considered to be not possessing self-consciousness and self-awareness, so they were blissfully ignored. And many other people, no children, many people were ignored that way. So these definitions, there's markers which have defined personhood, is like it's a much complicated one. Though it says we are talking about all humans. Okay, the talk is that it is about human rights, but who is human? It is limited to the persons. Who is person? Somebody who has rationality and reason. Where we see a kind of exclusion that is happening at the level of the very definition itself, right? Which is important for us to know. And also, once you say autonomy, then children will not be considered to be autonomous. So they will be blissfully removed. And freedom and dignity, the dignity is such an important concept, but you find that who has dignity? You look at your own lives around you, okay? And try to apply this concept of dignity. It is such a substantial concept, but it looks to be a myth in our own practical, pragmatic lives. It is strong concept, but it appears to be a very a kind of myth. That's what I find, in our lives, practical lives, everyday lives, right? So this understanding what constitutes personhood is very important, which has larger implications in the process of exclusion of humans. Okay, so this is where I ask this question: who is a person finally? Do you think that persons are known to us, or are there any new humans coming into existence? Right? This is a very important question, because I'll be coming to this in the next slide. Okay. Are there any new humans? We discover new humans that are excluded from the perspective or definitions that are provided. We keep on discovering new humans, in the history of ideas. It's surprising, right? Look at this. It is extended to slaves. And then they said, oh, slaves are also humans, new humans coming into picture. And then it is extended to women. Oh, they are also new humans. And then to children. And then to indigenous people. And then to people with morbidities. And then to minorities. And then to immigrants. Legal and illegal as well. Okay, now even illegal immigrants have rights. Okay, so and then it was extended to newborns, because initially people thought newborns do not have rights because they are not autonomous, they don't have freedom, they don't have rationality, they are not self-conscious, they are not self-aware, etc., etc. So all these definitions deprive them, throw them out, right? So they were also brought into the domain. So what I'm trying to say is, look at the history of ideas. You would find that there are new humans emerging every now and then. Were they non-existent? This is where Michiko's concept is so important to me. Unless you know them, you don't consider them to be existent. That is really a kind of, that's I was telling her before coming here, like, I want you to use this Japanese sword. She was doing it this way. So this is a Japanese sword that she has used, which is very important to me. Knowing precedes recognizing the existence, right? So it's like, now it's not just newborn, even unborn also have rights that we are talking about. Fetus has rights, right? We do talk about rights of the fetus. And sometime back, probably people might not have even thought. But of course, one of the things that we should be considering to be fortunate is the technology which has facilitated the development of the origin of the fetus in the stomach of the mother, which has told us that, yeah, from this day onwards, it has life. So that's how rights were extended to the fetus as well. So what I mean to say is, there are new human beings coming up. And this is where the question that comes is, it's not the human rights that we are talking about. It is also the question of being human. Some people may ask, I have a right to be human? right? Because you are going on depriving certain sections which from the universal human rights, okay, universal within quote and quote. And this really is a disturbing thing that probably there are still people who are trying to argue that I have a right to be human, right? Which we haven't recognized yet. So there is a fight for right to be human by these people continuously happened in the history, which is important, which I thought all of us should take note of. Yeah, actually, if I'm crossing my limitations of time, Professor Dilip, you're free to stop me. Now, the question is coming back to this concept of universality. In fact, we had a wonderful presentation in the morning. First presentation was, oh, he's here. He spoke on universality, the concept of universality. I was like, yeah, this is such a crucial concept, because whenever we talk about human rights, we talk about universal human rights. Universal rights being human rights being universal, which is a very complicated one. No? In the name of universality, yeah, the question is, if we are talking about human rights being universal, then where is the need for extension? If it is universal, why should we be extending it to the people? And why should we be going on extending it? So the very concept of extension that is existent within the discourse of human rights shows us that there are limitations of the definition itself, or limitations of the conceptualization itself. Okay, so this is what takes us to the notion of universality. And in the name of universality, the notion of human rights resorted to abstract, empty, universal. This is again another philosophical category that I'm using. I'll try to explain that now, which is universal but doesn't include any particular. Remember, we are told that there are universals and there are particulars, right? But for me, it's not that we have universals and particulars as two categories. We have universal and universal, abstract universal. For instance, in the history, you find the term man being used for every human being, right? And if it is used for every human being, it doesn't include any human being. Okay? It is an abstract universal which has no concrete individuals rooted in it, though it claims to be the label for all within its umbrella. So then we come down to even I use this model on feminism. Okay, initially when feminism came into existence, it came as an abstract universal, and then we had French feminism, American feminism, etc., coming up, which is a kind of concrete universal. Okay, abstract universal to concrete universal, and then we come to something called a particular universal. Okay, where we started talking about post-colonial feminism. Okay, even with regard to human rights, post-colonial countries said we are not being part of the human rights discourse that you have constructed. So they try to strive for their place, where we find particular universal coming into existence in terms of minority rights, and also post-colonial countries asserting their own selves. And then we have, at the rootedness, we have concrete particulars. Okay, so it's not universal and particular, it is abstract universal and concrete universal, particular universal, and then concrete particular. Okay, so this is how the discourse, the history of ideas, if you look at them, this is how even human rights discourse has evolved, which is to be properly understood, which is like very astonishing kind of one. So it claims itself to be a universal, but in fact it is an abstract universal which is empty initially. Now we have extended it further and redefined it. In the process, we have reached to minority rights, post-colonial conception of rights, and women's rights, etc. And now we have come to the concrete, particular notion of rights. So this discourse is very interesting, and this discourse is also a process of universalizing. Okay, so initially the universal that was conceptualized by universal human rights is only an empty particular that I was trying to refer to. In the course of history, try to fill the empty basket with concrete particulars and particular groups. This is how the journey began with the abstract exclusion, which is inclusive exclusion. Okay, what I mean by this inclusive exclusion is when they say, as I gave the example of man, they say it is an inclusive, exclusive concept. Okay, which means we include everyone within this empty one. Okay, so that's an inclusive exclusion that happens, which the dominant view of human rights that I'm referring to has developed, and continue to exclusive inclusion, which is like special rights that we are talking about now. Okay, what is needed for the present is to go beyond the paradigm of inclusion and exclusion, which is actually the need that we have to look at. In fact, in this particular context, we have to ask this question when United Nations at the larger level, and also in the popular discourse, in terms of global discourse that we find human rights discourse, when we find that, we have to ask all the time. We have to ask this question like, am I an insider or am I an outsider to the discourse? Okay, am I included in it, included by them, or am I an outsider to it? This is a very important point, because especially the presentations that happen in terms of indigenous people talking about their own conception of rights, we find that, oh yeah, do we find their representation there? If we find them, how do we find them there? Okay, how do we find them there is a very important one, because it could be their own reality that is constructed within which we were given a place. Okay, do you understand the difference between that and you being an active part of it? Right, so that's what is important to us. In fact, in this regard, when I was looking at Indian constitution, it only talks about fundamental rights. Rights are not universal, rights are to be fundamental. So that shift that they have given in the constitution is something very interesting, since we have been since morning referring to Baba Saheb Ambedkar, who is the Constitution Drafting Committee chairman. This is important for us to know that it is not universal rights that they spoke about. They spoke about fundamental rights, which is very important for us to note specifically. Okay, so I also have a problem with human rights education that we often talk about. Oh yeah, human rights education that we talk about. For instance, they ask us to teach human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and French Revolution, etc., in the villages and the schools everywhere. Okay, in every country. So this appears to be a problematic thing to me. The culture in which we are going to teach it may have a different kind of reality in place, and they may have a different kind of notion of duty and right in place, and you are going to teach this universal declaration to be the only way of educating human rights to them. I'll give you a small example. Some of the cultures consider child rights. Okay, children, rights of the children, right? So some countries consider family to be an oppressive unit. It oppresses. Okay, but in some countries, the reality of family might have conceptualized in a different way, not as an oppressive unit. Right, now you go and teach this conceptualization that is evolved from an oppressive reality to them and teach them there. Okay, so what is it going to be? Do you understand the rupture that is happening, the epistemic rupture that happens with the child? Right, so that's why when we talk about this human rights education, sometimes I really get agitated, because I have done some projects at the ground level on human rights, and awareness of the human rights for the awareness of the girl-child rights. No, this is what I worked on at the village level, and I found it to be sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's so troubling because I felt I may be giving a different kind of education to them, which puts themselves and their families in trouble, right? So there is a kind of rupture that comes up immediately within the kids and in the family that I found. It's not that all the time the institutions that have evolved are oppressive. Universalizing this concept is a troubling kind of one for me. And there is a kind of false universalizability, which is very dominant in the human rights discourse that we find, which says universality in the form of activism. No? You go everywhere and become an activist, and that is how you universalize the human rights, right? So this is also a very troubling kind of one in some of the institutions and some of the countries, some of the cultures. So this is also to be properly guided and understood. I'm not saying all activism is wrong, because I also believe in activism in the sense that I consider myself to be a philosophical activist. So activism is not all wrong, but if it is going beyond the limits, then going to indigenous culture and telling them about certain kind of rights which may not be in consonance with their own worldviews would be creating a kind of rupture to them, though it may appear to be liberating from my own dominant perspective, which is to be weighed and understood in a proper way for me, right? So yeah. And do you know human rights? Does it end anywhere? The list of the human rights? It's never ending. It goes on. It should go on, obviously, right? It should not stop with, we should have only 5 rights or 10 rights or 100 rights, right? It goes on, right? So the quest for new rights that has been on for a long time, Oh, something that is missing there. Yeah, but in the quest for this new rights, which has been getting added to the list that are prepared, the question for me is: are we authors or are we only followers? Are we contributors or are we only lobbyists? See, something happens in my country, and I have to lobby it at the international level so that my request is heard there or placed there for the discussion, right? Or somebody else blames my country for violating human rights, then I have to lobby. So is it that at the international level, lobbying is becoming more dominant, prominent, and a kind of stronger instrument than human rights itself, right? Which is also a kind of troubling kind of thing for me. And this is another important question: like, are we authors or are we followers? In fact, I don't know. I should not be. I don't know. Yeah, let me still talk about it. If you look at the recent discourse of Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, in the United Nations speech that he gave a few months back, I believe, he says, with regard to India-Canada relations, with reference to that, he was mentioning about this in United Nations as a response to that. He says, we have to understand whether we should go by the dominant perspectives that are coming up, which are to be imposed on us, as the followers, or do we have any right to contribute to the discourse? That is how I believe even BRICS has come into existence, which has a very important space in the international relations. So origin and development of the concept of human right is within a specific cultural political context that was unique to a specific epistemology grown out of a distinct self experience. Okay, are we just deriving from it, or are we contributing to it as well? And in this regard, I would urge all of you. I'm holding a chair of Indology and Gandhian studies in the University of West Indies at Jamaica. So I started reading Gandhi with more seriousness and more academic rigor. And when I was trying to read about his views on human rights. And also, interestingly, he was consulted during Universal Human Rights Declaration. Before that, he was consulted, but he did not go with that. He did not buy their argument. But India has made significant contributions in the Human Rights Declaration, okay, in the discussions, and also later on, they stayed with the concept man, and it was changed into human only because of the intervention of India there, right? So that is how I'm asking this question, like, are we contributors or are we followers of the dominant view that is presented to us is important to me, right? The context presented this context presented all natural and human institutions to be oppressive and harmful to human autonomy and freedom, because human autonomy and freedom were given primacy, and all the institutions, every institution, whether it is natural or artificial, human-created artificial institution, they are all oppressive and harmful. And against this oppression, developed this concept of right to protect the human individuality, because even in the morning we had reference to Thomas Hobbes, the modern Western philosopher, who conceptualizes state of nature to be nasty, brutish, and short, or human life to be life in a state of nature to be nasty, brutish, and short, and state of nature to be state of war of each against the other, right? So rights discourse has evolved out of such kind of conceptualization, which was existent, which is context specific to the West, and the dominant view that I'm referring to. So if we extend it beyond its own purview and to everyone, then the problem is, like, does the definition of HR has a problem? Because definitions often seem to be closing everything. Once you define it, the concept is closed, right? And then everything that you have to see is to see whether it fits into that context, the framework that you have already closed. So that's how, even in the morning, I had a discussion with one of the friends here, like, definitions have a problem. So be careful with the definitions. We often tend to give, if somebody tells us something, we immediately ask, what is the definition of it? Never ask for it. Rather, you give a definition so that you can always modify your own definitions. So definitions are very problematic ones. They fix you. Definitions fix you. Your epistemology would be dead. No, it is sealed forever. So don't seal your epistemologies by resorting to definitions which we think, unfortunately, our epistemologies were told. The way we have conceptualized our epistemology is to seek definitions. Seeking definitions is not philosophizing or quest for knowing, right? So that's another important concern that I had with this. Yeah. So whatever dominant view that I have presented, its implications. I'm trying to check my time. Oh, sorry. I thought I have taken a lot of time. Yeah, I'll try to quickly. 10 more minutes? Okay, yeah. So implications of this dominant view, because I haven't reached the other part of it, but I'll try to quickly do it, okay? Universalizing the perspective that originated in the context and experience to every other culture and peoples is the problem with the dominant view that I'm referring to. I have already spoke about that. This example also I already spoke. Family as an oppressive mechanism. It may not be an oppressive mechanism in an indigenous culture in Brazil, or indigenous culture elsewhere in Africa or India, right? But still, presenting it to be an oppressive mechanism and trying to, emancipate people there is a problematic proposition that I would say. To argue that the cultures and peoples that did not share experience this context to be not developed, that is another problem. See, the cultures which did not evolve this concept of rights or underdeveloped, barbaric, right, is a kind of discrediting the importance of the cultures, uniqueness of the cultures. And this whole process of universalizing dominant epistemology The doctrine of human rights, for example, rests on certain conception of the human being. Some cultures may not understand this concept, human being, at all. Don't think that it is strange. I would also ask, like, since Professor George has mentioned that there are 170 or 300 indigenous groups here, what is the word that they have for human being in their language? You look at those words, they may not be similar to English human being. They may have a different kind of concept of it. For instance, in Sanskrit, manushya, right, sir? Manishi or Manushya and Vyakti, these are the words that are used, and they may not exactly refer to human being that we are talking about. They may be referring to different contexts in which the being is being. Okay, so that's how the concept of human being. Don't think that it is common to everyone. It has to be common to everyone in the same way that one culture has understood. So that's another important point that I thought I should bring it to your notice. Implications of one of the other implications is this perspective placed essentiality of human in relation with the artificial external constructs. Okay, what is the essence of the individual? It is based on the kind of institutions that you have artificially constructed, and the relation with and only on the basis of the relation with the artificially constructed institutions your essence is created. This is how human rights discourse has evolved and conceptualized human to be a person. Okay, so that's again a problematic thing to me. This leads to another implication that all human institutions are essentially oppressive everywhere. Essentially oppressive and essentially oppressive everywhere. That's universalizability that I'm referring to. Dominant perspectives conceptualization of institutions as essentially oppressive is universalized. It talks about freedom of speech and action. Often in the human rights discourse, something that is prominently comes up is speech and action. Okay, as though human being is reduced to only speech and action, but speech and action are only two forms of expressing oneself, but essentiality of determining this is something that happens at the level of thinking. So in Indian tradition, we talk about manasa, vacha, karmana, which means through your mind. I mean, mind is a wrong translation of manas, and then vacha, word, and your action. Okay, so they together, all these three formulate what you are. Okay, so but reducing them to only speech and action is another important concern. In fact, in the morning it was coming up with one of the friends when I was discussing. It's like human rights as a speech act is a wonderful area to work. Human rights, are they speech acts? I was thinking that probably, yeah, I should look for locutionary, perlocutionary from the side of J.L. Austin and look at it, right? These two are rooted in human voluntary actions. This is another interesting concept that I thought I should develop. I thought of developing, but I couldn't do it because we have somehow conceptualized that only voluntary actions are important for human beings. But involuntary or other than voluntary actions are so important for the human being. Because they are the ones which facilitate what we try to do in terms of constructing a civilization or developing a production that we looked at, which is basically voluntary actions. But we should not stop at the level of voluntary actions. In fact, I strongly advocate pause in actions. I have been developing ethics of inactivity. You stop your activity for some time. In fact, this also came up in one of the presentations of the indigenous cultures, where they said it's not voluntary actions which are important, it is also stopping the voluntary actions which is important. You go on in the name of development, adding to the voluntary actions, and it's not just you, the whole global population is adding to the voluntary actions, and this is what leads to exploitation of nature. So we started urging that you stop your voluntary actions for some time so that the nature can survive, right? If you are talking about natural rights of the ecosystem, what is required is not your voluntary actions, but your abstinence from the voluntary actions, which is very important for us. Anyway, yeah. Just give me 2 minutes. I'm winding up. Yeah, basically, broadly, when I look at Indian tradition, for me, self-reliance is the concept that I have taken up. I have been working on this concept for a quite long time, especially from the Gandhian perspective, where I see we understand this concept self-reliance, right? We understand self-reliance to be related to independence. But actually, independence and self-reliance are two different kind of ones. Independence is more rooted in individualism, and self-reliance is more rooted in communitarianism. Okay, that's what I wanted you to understand. Okay, when it comes to the yeah, let me quickly come to this particular concept so that independence is a negative has a negative connotation as it negates dependence, whereas self-reliance is a positive concept where relying on the self is stressed. Okay, independence presupposes a break or disjuncture, whereas self-reliance presupposes a continuity and conjuncture. Independence is an exclusive concept since independence has to be always from a particular. Okay, whereas self-reliance is an inclusive concept as it takes all the other into consideration, and self in relation to the other is the focus of self-reliance. And there is a very wonderful kind of definition that Mahatma Gandhi gives of self-reliance. He says self-reliance is not possessing more, rather becoming more. You as an individual have to become more rather than trying to have more. Once you have more, you become more dependent on them. Once you become more, then the ecosystem around you makes you sustain yourself. So self-reliance is only possible by becoming more according to him. So I basically try to present that from the Indian conception. These are the four concepts which are like corners for me: Rita, Rana, Runa, that Professor Dilip spoke, and then Dharma and Dana. Okay, because I said in order to talk about the rights, you should know the framework within which your life is situated. So Indian conception of the framework that I have presented is this is the one. Talking about rights makes sense only when one understands the limitations of life in terms of what broader laws encapsulate human survival, which is in terms of Rita, which is a cosmic law that Indian tradition talks about, what debts are to be accounted for, which is in terms of concept of Runa that Professor Dilip spoke about, and what duties are to be followed at different stages of life, which is conceptualized in terms of dharma, and knowing whether we essentially possess anything at all. No, because that's what leads to dana, like giving away your possessions to others. So I believe this is the broader framework within which the self-reliance concept of self-reliance has developed within in Indian tradition, which gives a different kind of alternative conceptualization of the reality, metaphysical reality that that doesn't give space to the kind of conception of human rights that dominant view has presented to us. Okay, so sorry, second part I had to really condense, but I thought of stressing more on the the first part where the proper deconstruction of this notion of human rights should be presented. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Devarakonda. I think maybe during the questions, some of these things that you have prepared for that can be discussed further on. I'll just have two brief comments. One is a question, the other you may just comment on my comment. The concept of innocence. I found it very interesting, philosophically speaking.
Yeah.
And you connect it with ignorance. In fact, I'm not, I'm just thinking about what Indian term could be appropriate. Innocence is a kind of gentle ignorance. That is one first question. The other, I think we are at crossroads hearing what you have said, because in one sense, when you spoke about universalization of human rights, but I think it applies to any other concept within this context of colonial journey of Western concepts, which are somewhat impositive to colonial situations. So universalization in the sense of abstractions, the generous it may be is a problem. No, it's a problem. The generous it may be, or it may look like, it is a problem for its impositive character and abstract character. Better not, no? But if it is concrete, and you gave examples, we may have to completely redefine what rights are and what human is. No? And I'm just thinking about the example you gave about the Indian Constitution. And I'm not talking just about the rights, but terms like secularism, socialism, democracy. Is it that the concretization of these concepts imply, through the process of freedom struggle within the framework of epistemologies, redefined those concepts to a certain extent? And in that sense, what fundamental rights mean in that redefined sense of human rights in the Indian Constitution, if you can just briefly speak to us. These are the two questions, or the two comments.
The first one, innocence and ignorance. So I was just trying to, it's not that I'm just trying to play with the words, but I believe there is a difference between innocence. A child is innocent as well as ignorant. But an adult, okay, what kind of example should I give? A child, and I'm not getting an example. Anybody would like to contribute to this distinction between innocence and ignorance? Ignorance doesn't involve necessarily innocence, okay? Because you're just ignorant, but you're clever. So there is no innocence there. With regard to many of our everyday life activities, we are not innocent. We are sometimes ignorant. Right? Do you understand what I'm presenting? Like, ignorance doesn't necessarily involve innocence. This is what I'm looking at. Does innocence necessarily involve ignorance? I don't think so. Not necessary.
It's not a general ignorance.
No, it's not gentle ignorance, because I'm trying to bring in this epistemic injustice, etc. That's what is running in my mind. So in epistemic injustice, what is it? No, it's like ignorance. I'm ignoring somebody and trying to do things. So that's what happened with human rights. You know, when they said man includes everybody, okay. So do you think it is innocence? It is not innocence, definitely. Okay. Definitely it is ignorance in the sense that they want to intentionally ignore the divisions. So the multiplicity, diversity, whenever it is taken to be the homogeneity, there is a ignorance that is coming up. There is no innocence there. Okay, they know there is a kind of knowledge, but they intentionally ignore. So that's what I was referring to. Yeah. Coming to the second one, this concretization of the conceptualization of rights is important. And I felt that when I was reading this discourse on fundamental rights in Indian Constitution, I felt they're trying to reach this concrete particular rather than remaining at abstract universal. So that's where giving space for affirmative action and minority rights was so important at that particular point of time. So that's what made me relook at this, this structure of abstract universal to concrete particular. So yeah, I believe that's a good move, and thank you for pointing out that.
Vamos abrir para questões. Nenhuma pergunta? Uma pergunta? Uma pergunta. Aqui, ó, Ricardo.
Yeah, probably we can have quick questions, and I'll try to answer in quickly.
Okay.
As quickly as possible.
At first, one comment to the problem and to the question regarding ignorance and innocent. In my understanding, ignorance is epistemological, while innocence that can have a religious sense, religious meaning. A baby, for example, or Adam in paradise, is innocent. But only the human being which has grown up can be ignorant. That is my understanding. And my comment has something to do with my question. Your argumentation has remembered me some argumentation of Plato. He says that only something which is somehow known to me can be put in question. And that is, this situation can be described as in a modern philosophy with a term, hermeneutic circle. And the hermeneutic circle is a circle in which we are, which remain, in which we are kept, in which we are, in German to say gefangen, how to say gefangen, grasped. And my question is, do you think or do you believe that there is something which is quite alien in radical sense, which shocks me? And so that this alien, radically alien thing is not known to me. But just because of the shock, which gives just the absolutely strange alien thing that can open us in another dimension of self-knowledge. I would like to say that insofar as we remain in a hermeneutic circle, we can make an advance in knowledge. That is good. But we remain at any rate on the same dimension. And with one example of a Zen master in Japan, who has once heard a word, everyone has Buddha nature. And his question was, when everyone has Buddha nature, why should we train ourselves? What is the necessity of training? And he remained at first within a range of a hermeneutic circle. But this circle could be broken through. And how would you interpret this dimension of the question? You have said correctly that something which is somehow known, but not known clearly, that is correct. I mean correct. But this hermeneutic circle doesn't break through the dimension which is quite alien and through which our human being or human, our being as itself reaches the higher dimension, which can be described as religious or spiritual or so. That is my question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. In fact, it requests long discussion for answering this, but you basically, he was referring to the first formulation that I have presented, saying that knowledge or origin of concepts comes in this way, right? This is how the framework that I have presented. So that's where he's talking about, is it that a lane kind of one strongly, strangely has to come in front so that you can liberate yourself from certain kind of circular knowledge system, right? Is that what? So I always argue that we have something called known and unknown. And unknown sometimes comes in a familiar way, but sometimes unknown comes in a very strange, strong, strange way. And this unknown that comes in a strong, strange way also tries to develop our knowledge, but it shocks us, no? So if we place this whole discourse of unknown, placing it unknown within the domain of the conceptualization and knowledge, and again bringing it to Buddhism and trying to see it, I would think about it and respond to you during our dinner session. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Então a gente termina essa sessão, certo? Ok. Obrigado. Thank you, Professor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.